What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. And today we are going to be talking about some players that you can add to your fantasy football teams before week 1 starts of the regular season. That way you can get an advantage over your league mates, beat the waiver wire in week 2, and start your reign towards fantasy football domination. So with that being said, I have about 22 players we'll talk about today, 12 that are about double check players that are rostered in over 50% of leagues that you should just check your waiver wire for, but 10 deep stashes that you can add to the end of your bench to help you win. So without wasting any more time, let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about these waiver wire ads. So as I mentioned, there are about 12 players right now that are close to 50% rostership, maybe a little bit over 50% rostership, that they should be on your fantasy football teams. If they are on your waiver wires, make sure you go add these guys to your teams. Those players are going to be Jaylen Wright, the running back for the Miami Dolphins, Rico Dowdle, the running back for the Dallas Cowboys, Charbonnet, the running back for the Seattle Seahawks, Allgeier, the running back for the Atlanta Falcons, Dobbins, the running back for the Los Angeles Chargers, Adonai Mitchell, the wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts, Jakobi Meyers, the wide receiver for the Las Vegas Raiders, Jeudy, the wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns, Joshua Palmer, the wide receiver for the Los Angeles Chargers, Mike Williams, the wide receiver for the New York Jets, Gabe Davis, the wide receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and Rashid Shaheed, the wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints. As I mentioned, these guys should be on your rosters. If they are on your waiver wires, make sure to go pick these guys up. But now looking at these 10 guys that you should be picking up off of waivers, we're going to start at the running back position. The running back position is going to be the best way for you to get an advantage because we know that that position gets the most injuries. It's often the easiest position to find league winners at. So we're going to go try and pick up a couple of these running backs, and we're going to start with Jaleel McLaughlin, the running back for the Denver Broncos. Now you look at his current rostership, the ownership percentage that he has over on Sleeper, he's sitting at about 43% right now. Now the thing about Jaleel is he is the clear handcuff to start the year for Javonte Williams, but I think he's likely going to have his own standalone role in this offense. Now, last year in games where he saw over 35% of the snaps, he gave us running back 1 finishes in each of those weeks. So when we've seen him get the opportunity, he has produced for fantasy football. Now, as I mentioned, he should be in line for an increased role here in year 2 of his career. And looking at this Denver Broncos offense, last year they passed to the running back position on 32% of their total targets, which was the highest in the NFL. So he should have some upside in your PPR leagues as well. And that doesn't even account for the fact that there is a rookie quarterback in town that is more likely to check the football down than a guy like Russell Wilson. And just as the cherry on top, Denver has a top 5 easiest schedule in fantasy football this year for the running back position. So if you're looking for a guy with PPR upside, some opportunity at hand, and an easy schedule, Jaleel McLaughlin is a no-brainer. Now the second player we're going to talk about is going to be Antonio Gibson of the New England Patriots, and he is currently rostered in about 35% of those leagues. So all signs point to Antonio Gibson being a contributor in this offense, complementing Ramondre Stevenson, maybe even having his own standalone role on third downs or pass catching situations as well. Now the reality is this is probably going to be a bad offense, and you may not see the upside for a guy like Antonio Gibson until they switch from Jakobi Brissett to Drake May, who is likely going to be the better, higher upside type of quarterback for this New England Patriots offense. And because of that, as long as Jakobi Brissett is the starter, there probably isn't going to be much touchdown upside for a guy like Antonio Gibson either. But as I mentioned, in a PPR league or a half-point PPR league, somewhere where you're going to get those extra points for every catch that your running back sees, I think Antonio Gibson could have some value because, as I mentioned, he's going to be playing on these third down situations. And that's not even to mention that the New England Patriots are likely going to be losing a lot of their games early on in the season, maybe even for the majority of the season, meaning that they're going to be passing the football more than other teams and likely just playing from behind trying to keep up, meaning Antonio Gibson could see some extra catches. So that being said, it may be worth adding Antonio Gibson to your fantasy football roster just to see what his role is like in week 1, and on the off chance that, worst case scenario, he is just the Ramondre Stevenson handcuff, something ever happens to Ramondre, Antonio Gibson should be the clear running back to step into his place. Now the next running back that I want to talk about, this has to be somebody that you go target. It's going to be Jordan Mason, running back for the San Francisco 49ers, and he's being rostered in about 28% of leagues right now. That number is just not high enough for the value that Jordan Mason could have in fantasy football. And you look at what he's done this preseason, he has clearly won this running back 2 job behind Christian McCaffrey, who has already been dealing with some injury to start the preseason. And although we still expect Christian McCaffrey to play week 1, It's worth noting that he hasn't even gotten back to practice yet for the most part. He is probably going to be practicing later today, maybe even tomorrow, but he has been working on the sideline for the majority of the preseason, and if there was any chance that Christian McCaffrey goes out there a little bit early, re-aggravates the calf injury, or just gets hurt again, we could be looking at a guy who has immediate running back 2 upside in one of the league's best offenses. And the reason why I think you have to go rush and pick up Jordan Mason right now is because if that were to happen, we could be looking at Jordan Mason as the #1 waiver wire priority target in week 2 of the fantasy football season. So if you have Christian McCaffrey, you have to have Jordan Mason on the back end of your bench, or maybe if you don't have Christian McCaffrey and you want to beat the waiver wire in week 2, or at least have the chance to beat the waiver wire in week 2, you should be rostering Jordan Mason right now in your fantasy football leagues. Now, another running back that you guys should be keeping your eye on should be Ray Davis of the Buffalo Bills. He currently is rostered in about 28% of leagues, and he's looked very solid during the NFL preseason, kind of as a complementary piece to what James Cook can be in this Buffalo Bills offense. Now, obviously, the Buffalo Bills, they've been kind of looking for another running back in this offense for a long time. We've seen guys like Latavius Murray, Leonard Fournette, Ty Johnson, all of these nobodies who really have come in past their prime and haven't taken over that role, but they just haven't been as talented as what Ray Davis can be in this offense. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if Ray Davis does have some standalone value in this offense as the goal line back for James Cook and kind of being that hard-nosed grinder during the early downs of some of these Buffalo Bills drives. Now, we also know that this Buffalo Bills offense is going to look a little bit different. They ran the football a little bit more in the back half of the year last year, and I fully expect them to continue to do so as they go into this year with the departures of Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis from this offense. So expect them to lean on the run. Maybe Ray Davis has the goal line work, or maybe he's just that grinder. I think there is an opportunity for Ray Davis to be successful here in Buffalo. And that also doesn't account for the fact that if anything were to happen to James Cook in this offense, Ray Davis is the clear handcuff in this offense and should see an increased workload if that were to happen. Now, the second to last running back I want to talk about in this is going to be Braelon Allen of the New York Jets. He's being rostered in about 25% of leagues, and this guy is a clear handcuff to Breece Hall. Braelon looked fantastic during the preseason. He actually looked like one of the better rookie running backs so far already this year, and what we know is he has ran away with the running back 2 job here in New York, so he should be that clear backup, as I mentioned. Now, even though he is going to be that backup, I don't know if there is a clear role for him to have opportunity in this offense if Breece Hall is healthy, because we do fully expect Breece Hall to be a bell cow in this offense, as he should be. But if Breece Hall were to go down, this is a guy who could have some league-winning upside here in Braelon Allen. So in a week like week 1, where there's not a lot of new news and there's not a lot of injuries or anything to kind of react to on the waiver wire, maybe Braelon Allen is a player that you just pick up and stash and see what happens week 1. Maybe there is a surprise injury. Hopefully not. Obviously, we don't want injuries in fantasy football, but maybe there is. And if there is, you beat the waiver wire and it only costed you 1 week of stashing Braelon Allen. And if nothing happens and he doesn't have a good role, cut him and move on and pick somebody else in week 2 once we get some more news. And now the final running back we're going to talk about is going to be Bucky Irving, the running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He is being rostered in about 24% of leagues right now, and he was selected in the 4th round of the NFL draft, and he was one of only 2 running backs in college football in the FBS to catch 50+ passes last season. Now, he is a little bit undersized, and that may affect his opportunity to be a bell cow if anything were to happen to Rashid White, but he was drafted to this offense to be that insurance option for Rashid White. Now, there is an opportunity for Bucky Irving to kind of mix in on 3rd downs and spell Rashid White, just giving him a little bit of PPR value, but it may take an injury for him to be successful. That being said, he's still probably worth a stash at this point in the season, especially if you're playing in one of those PPR leagues. And as we know, in the offseason, some of the coach speak, some of it's good, some of it's bad. We've had a lot of good coach speak for Bucky Irving so far, especially from Bucs offensive coordinator Liam Cohen, who's talked a lot about the athleticism of Bucky Irving, which kind of has been a negative talking point for Rashid White at the NFL level. So that's definitely something that we should monitor going into week 2. But now that we got the running backs out of the way, let's talk a little bit about some wide receivers you could stash. I think the #1 wide receiver you should look at is going to be Jaylen Polk of the New England Patriots. He is only rostered in about 45% of leagues right now, and that number should definitely be a lot higher. Jaylen Polk could very well lead this wide receiver room in targets. He could be the #1 wide receiver for fantasy football on this New England Patriots offense. And if that were to happen, that's likely going to be because he's receiving a hefty target share in an offense that's going to be passing the football a ton. Now, he's a player I'm definitely drafting, and if you didn't draft him and he's on the waiver wire, you should definitely be grabbing, because I want to see what this role looks like in week 1, because this offense does need a true wide receiver 1 to kind of get rolling. I think that's going to be Jalen Polk for them. And the Patriots, they believed in him enough to select him with that 37th overall pick in the NFL draft, and he was able to produce at Washington alongside an elite wide receiver talent in Rome Odunze. So that alone should tell you just how talented Jalen Polk is, and now that you have the opportunity in front of him, he's definitely worth stashing. I also think it's worth noting, and it also helps, that the New England Patriots, they start their season against the Cincinnati Bengals and the Seattle Seahawks in week 2, two teams who gave up the 9th and the 13th most points to fantasy wide receivers last year, so it is a little bit of softer, easier matchups, at least based off of last year's stats, for Jalen Polk to get started off with. Now, moving on to our second wide receiver, we're going to talk about Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts, and he is only being rostered in about 33% of leagues, and the reason for this is probably because of that preseason high ankle sprain. Now, if he didn't suffer that injury, he would be a player that was likely drafted in every single league. He probably would have a rostership percentage of about 75-80% if there was no injury. But because of that injury, we're seeing a major dip in the ownership percentage, and I think savvy managers can take advantage of this. Last year, Josh Downs, he ran about 81% of his routes from the slot, and I think when healthy, he's going to absorb all of those slot routes once again for the Indianapolis Colts. And one thing that I found kind of interesting is that he was listed as questionable for week 1, which kind of tells me that he may be a little bit further along than some people think. I mean, earlier, just a couple of weeks ago, he was maybe even potentially a PUP candidate depending on the injury, but it looks like those worries for the PUP may be gone, and we may be getting a great value on Josh Downs if he does suit up in week 2 or even week 3 of the NFL season. Now, he's somebody that I'm definitely going to be stashing on my benches early, because I do think when he is back to 100%, he's going to be one of the most targeted waiver wire wide receivers that people are going to be trying to pick up. And so because of that, I'd rather just try and beat the waiver wire, get him a week or 2 early, and not have to blow a bunch of my fab on this waiver wire pickup or waste my priority on a guy like Josh Downs when everybody else decides they want him. Now, the last wide receiver I want to talk about is going to be Greg Dortch, the wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals, and he is only rostered in 10% of leagues. So 90% of your leagues, he is going to be on the waiver wire, and definitely somebody you should consider adding. Now, Greg Dortch, he's a player that I've drafted a ton as a last round pick in my best ball drafts all summer long, and I think that's because he is likely going to be in for a much larger role than people imagine, because I do believe that he is going to be the full-time slot wide receiver in a much improved Arizona Cardinals offense. Now, we have seen Greg Dortch give us fantasy football weeks from time to time where he's been giving us those 10 points per game or those 11 points per game. The problem is it's been very inconsistent, and that's come from an inconsistent role when he was kind of battling with Rondale Moore for that slot job. Now, the thing is, with Rondale now gone, I don't think there's really anybody to compete with here in Arizona, and we've gotten a lot of good news about Greg Dortch all offseason long, and I'm willing to bet on that at least in week 1 before we get a real waiver wire run in week 2. And I know it may sound a little bit like hopium, or maybe just hoping that he does perform, but I do think that there is a real chance, and if he does go out and give you a touchdown in week 1 and maybe catches 4, 5, 6 footballs in the process, we could be looking at a guy who's one of the top wide receiver pickups for waivers in week 2. And now the 10th and final player I want to talk about is going to be a tight end. We'll talk about Noah Fant of the Seattle Seahawks. He is being rostered in about 16% of leagues, so very low rostership for him as well. And he's been quite injured throughout the preseason. He hasn't played a lot, and it's mainly been because of a foot injury, but it does seem like he's likely going to practice, but we won't know for sure until we get those Wednesday reports, so maybe just another day or two that we should be keeping an eye on Noah Fant before we do add him to our rosters. Now, I would say he's worth a pickup if you struggled to draft tight end, or maybe you waited really long to draft tight end. You have somebody like Hawkinson who isn't going to play week 1. You're looking for a pick-me-up at the tight end position. I think Noah Fant might be the guy. We expect this Seattle Seahawks offense to be improved from what they have been in years past under Pete Carroll, especially now that Ryan Grubb of the Washington Huskies is now calling this offense. And I also look at the fact that this coaching staff chose to bring Noah Fant back to this team. He was supposed to be a free agent this offseason. They chose to go back out and grab him, and we've seen this coaching staff be successful, or at least coach on teams that have used tight ends in a successful way. We're talking about the Baltimore Ravens. Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, you guys know the names. We've seen them use use the tight end position. So if you're looking for a dart throw just to see what the opportunity looks like in week 1, maybe Noah Fant is a stash at the tight end position, and a position where you're likely just looking for guys who can produce right away anyways. Maybe Noah Fant is going to be one of those guys for you. So there you have it. There is 10 waiver wire pickups you should be looking to add before week 1 of the fantasy football season. 12 guys as well that should be on rosters already, but if for some reason they're not, make sure you go add them as well. If you did enjoy this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me. Making content for you all year long. Make sure you hit the notification bell. Tons of content coming your way. We're going to help you win your fantasy football championships this year. Also, make sure if you enjoyed the video, you found something actionable, something you're going to go do in your league, make sure you hit the like button for me. It is the best free way to show this channel some support. And last but not least, go join our Discord. I do have a link to a free Discord. It's linked in the description. I'm in there helping you guys with anything you got. Start sit questions, waivers, trades, anything fantasy football related, even dynasty fantasy football related, anything you got. I'm in there 24/7, 365 helping you guys out. And as I mentioned, it's free to join, so there is no risk in doing that. But with all of that out of the way, I will see you guys on our next video. But until then, peace out.